Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, there was encouragement in the numbers this week as COVID cases seem to be declining, but optimism never travels too far, as there was concern that the return of students might raise those numbers. We'll look at the latest from the state level, including a dispute over early voting, as well as schools reopening. Mayor Cantrell's State of the City speech included strong words against evictions. We'll look at that, as well as how Louisiana ranks in being counted by the Census. All that, plus plans to renovate an eyesore hotel in New Orleans East, are on the list for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Will Sutton, columnist, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Don Ostrom, Channel 12's specialty reporter. And Jeff Adelson, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. And we're going to stay with Jeff right now just to give us the latest COVID update. The governor talked to everybody yesterday at a press conference. And what's the latest? What does he have to say?
What we're looking at with COVID in Louisiana right now is we're sort of had a month-long decline in new cases, which is obviously good. A number of the other important metrics, hospitalizations, are also improving. So there's obviously some good signs that things are getting better. We've passed the second peak of the pandemic, which started earlier in the summer. As you pointed out in the introduction, though, we are getting into some unknowns. We haven't seen the effects of having schools open during the pandemic and don't really know exactly what the implications of that are going to be on new case numbers when students are back in school, both at the elementary and secondary level, and the universities that are opening up. And so we're kind of in this moment where things are looking good, but there's some things that we're not sure what are going to do the numbers. And also it's worth pointing out that right now, every region and every parish in the state is still above thresholds that the federal government has set for rolling back restrictions and going with further reopening. So important to sort of point out that case numbers are still higher than where they were back when we moved into phase 2.
But the daily case numbers, the new cases reported, I think it's 5 days in a row so far that they've come in under 1,000, which of course is good, but still the numbers are kind of high.
Yeah. It's back when we were at our lowest point. We were looking at 400, 500 cases a day. We're now looking at about 1,000, which is obviously significantly higher. When I was referring to the federal restrictions, if you look at the weekly case numbers, we're still looking at more than 100,000 cases per 100,000, more than 100 cases per 100,000 people throughout every region of the state over 2 weeks. So still some ways to go.
Yeah. But for what we're seeing right now is some of a decline and then also less people being hospitalized, which is definitely good news. Is this a correlation to mask wearing? Is this attributed to us wearing more masks?
It does seem, from what we know at the moment, the declines all correlate, and this is true both at the state level, where there were new restrictions put in by the governor, and in New Orleans, where Mayor Cantrell has increased restrictions over the last month. We've seen drops that correlate very closely with those actions, usually within the period where prior to those restrictions, where once those restrictions go into effect and you account for the delay in the time it takes to get infected or for symptoms to show up, you start to see the curves bend pretty clearly. So it does seem like the restrictions are having an effect on the overall numbers.
The governor a couple of 2 or 3 weeks ago had said, look, don't expect any change in terms of phases are concerned before the end of this month. We're in phase 2 with the additional restrictions he'd put in until the end of the month. So is he saying anything about that, about us moving on, any kind of timeline for that?
There hasn't been much more information from the state about when the state itself might move into a different phase. I'd be surprised if they made any announcements anytime soon that the state would be changing, particularly, again, with the unknown about what the effects of opening schools are going to be. And every school district in the state is doing things a little differently. So it's going to take a little bit of time to see those effects show up. Within New Orleans, which again has a different set of restrictions, Mayor Cantrell has said explicitly that the next restriction that will be lifted will be whether schools can open, which right now they've pushed back till after Labor Day. Case numbers in New Orleans are looking pretty good. So it's possible that they would be able to reopen at that point. But again, I wouldn't expect New Orleans to take any further steps until they know whether we see an increase in cases as schools open. And of course, as you and many of the people viewing this probably know, throughout the country, we've seen schools that have opened have had outbreaks with dozens of cases in some cases, and have had to readjust their plans almost immediately. So
we're going to hear more from Don about that. Errol, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, well, while he never says yes or no to that question about, will we move to the next phase, he does emphasize the schools, but what he's talking about is just not the grade schools and the kids. He's talking about the influx of college students that'll be coming into the state. And so the impact of both of those. So I think that's causing him to stand back a bit.
Okay, and Jeff, Jeffrey will touch on real quickly, which is important to a lot of people, the unemployment benefits. Those are going to be restarting up the extra money, but a lesser amount.
Yeah, this is the new unemployment system that the federal government has set up. My understanding is we're looking at about $300 in additional benefits for anyone that's receiving $100 in state benefits. So it's roughly half the amount of the additional federal benefits that were in place before the provisions in the CARE Act expired, and a significantly higher threshold for receiving them. Under the CARES Act, if you got $1 in state unemployment benefits, you got $600 in federal benefits. Now we're looking at $300 if you get $100 in state benefits. So much smaller pool of people, or a smaller pool of people anyway, and a smaller benefit. Okay.
All right, Jeff, thanks a lot. I'm going to move over to Errol right now. And Mayor Cantrell gave her State of the City address yesterday.
It was an address. I think this was her first major State of the City address. So it covered a lot of ground. It went into a lot of history, and it went into, of course, talking about the future. The significant history thing is she kept on mentioning that the yellow fever epidemic of 1853, there were 8,000 people that died in New Orleans. And she says that was significant in terms of, that was the really beginning of a health system. In fact, that the city's health department, which she said is the only parish-wide health department in the state, really began by that. And over the years, because of yellow fever, you saw a lot of institutions like Toro, the charity hospital system, Oxner, the mosquito control, the rodent control, all of those things really developed as responses to past problems that we've had. And she was using that as an argument about how we've had these big problems before, and we were able to deal with them. She did talk about the changes that's going to have. And I thought a really interesting line she says is that New Orleanians, as a people, are not used to social distancing, but that might be more a part of our immediate future, to be prepared that things are going to change. A point she really, really emphasized was evictions, because she knows it's happening right now, that there are a lot of evictions. And she says, a person shouldn't have to lie in their bed at night and worry about being evicted during a time of a pandemic. And of course, what she's urging is more support from the federal government, not just for the people who be evicted, but also to the people who own the property and the landlords, that they need help. And this is a serious problem. And then tied into this is also food. And she talked about the various food programs out there. The city is in dire financial problems. I think it's like $153 million because there's just money that's not coming in.
Right.
And she talked about the city employees, many of whom have to lose their jobs, and the great work that they have done. But I guess the one sort of positive thing about spending money is she talked about the bond proposals, some that have been passed before that are waiting to be spent, and some that they're going to be proposing. And so there should be a lot of street repairs and general infrastructure repairs within the next year. And she also addressed the unrest during this week, and she during the summer, and talked about, of course, while people had a right to demonstrate, that they were all pretty much peaceful in New Orleans, and that the police department didn't lose any people. Nobody quit, and the police department was able to hold together, and that the police department is still following guidelines. And so she saw that as being encouraging. And then she ended just with, as I think most mayors do, sort of like with this assurance that we can all stand together and things will get better eventually.
Yeah, because it is definitely going to be a challenging and stressful time for the city. As you said, the revenues have just been cut back. So we're seeing a real shortfall in the budget. All righty. Thanks a lot. I'm going to go over to Will right now. And something else that's really important, not only for the city of New Orleans, for the entire state of Louisiana, is counting our residents. The census is going on, but our numbers are just still too low in responses.
Unfortunately, we're not doing very well. And I think part of that has been what we've been dealing with the pandemic, which obviously has changed all of our lives. The national average right now is about 64.1%. And in Louisiana, we're at 57.9% across the entire state. But in New Orleans, we are really not doing well. We're at 56.3%, which is better than when I wrote about this a few days ago, but it's still shy of where you really want to hit that minimum of 60%. As we all know, this has a huge impact for a decade, because it has a lot to do with congressional districts. Mm-hmm. There's $1.5 trillion, not million or billion, $1 trillion at stake with Medicare and Medicaid and public services of all kinds. And of course, this fall we're having an election. Well, it's your census that determines the Electoral College votes.
Right. So what is the issue, though, do you think, Will, why our responses are so low? I know the pandemic has really disrupted everybody's lives. And then the next part of the question is, what's being done about that to try to get these numbers up in responses?
Well, a lot of times with census, and this is not only true this year, but this is true traditionally with census taking, we feel like it's an invasion of privacy, that the information is going to be used against us for one reason or another. Certainly, there are state and federal guidelines about who can live in a household with certain federal and state funds. And we feel that they're capturing our information, our Social Security number. You don't need to provide a Social Security number. The Constitution doesn't even mandate that you have to be a citizen. You have to be a resident. Mm-hmm. So any resident of a household, a domicile, is what the census is after for sake of making these counts. And they're doing it by mail, online, phone, and just on August 11th, they started going door to door. And it's of huge importance. In the city of New Orleans alone, the last real count was 2000 because, of course, with Hurricane Katrina, we lost quite a bit of our population. So this is the first chance since Katrina that we have a real opportunity to increase our count and therefore increase our funding of services.
And the deadline for this is pushed up a month now.
That's right. It's October 31. If you were to look back more than a few days ago, the website even said October 31st, but now it's September 30th. So an entire month short. And that's technically so that they can be certain that they will complete the count by the end of the year. But of course, when you already have issues with getting an accurate count, one of the things that happens with people not answering and self-responding is they go into statistical guessing by household, by census tract, and by district to estimate how many people might be. That's not as good as a real count, but they have to do something to get those numbers.
So the door knockers are out there now trying to pick up our count.
They're out there now. And it doesn't cut off the opportunity to respond online.
Okay.
The city of New Orleans is doing a number of things, including having a census day on August 26th. And they're having a Katrina Day of service. And they want everybody, for your act of service, to make sure that you complete your count.
All right. Thanks a lot, Will. I'm going to go over to Don right now, and let's get back to the issue of schools. So some schools are opening, kids are in class, not in class. What is the situation?
The vast majority of the kids in our area are either back in class now, in person or virtually, or will be next week. There are a few more school systems like St. Tammany that are waiting entirely until after Labor Day. Everybody else is in. All the Catholic schools are back in. The independent schools are back in. Orleans Parish started back up last week. Their public schools all virtually. Orleans Parish, as Jeff alluded to earlier, is revisiting the numbers at the end of next week. So a week from today, they'll revisit the numbers. If the numbers are low enough, they'll go ahead and announce the plan to reopen in-person learning at Orleans Parish schools that would happen not until after Labor Day. Jefferson Parish, as you know, was delayed at the 11th hour 2 weeks ago. The teachers are back in the classrooms now. The students will be back in person. High schoolers across the board are not there every single day, but the kids will be back in classrooms in Jefferson Parish next week. Of course, now we're looking at potential hurricanes next week, so all of those plans may change. Right. But across the board, schools are back open. And for the most part, the openings have been relatively smooth. There are a handful of Catholic schools where there have been cases of COVID and individual classes or homerooms have had to quarantine, but there aren't whole schools yet in our area that have had to shut down as a result of COVID. So far, all of the distancing measures at least appear to be working. I know I have two in school, one in an archdiocesan school, one in an independent school. In both cases, my sons are temperature checked daily. There are questions that they have to answer every day, and they're wearing masks. They're also staying with much smaller groups than normal. They're not combining forces with friends or at lunch or at PE. They stay within their own group, and those plans seem to be working so far. So far, so good. But again, Orleans Parish will know more this time next week. St. Tammany not going back to any kind of schooling until after Labor Day, and everybody else is kind of in between.
Jefferson Parish, I know the numbers for virtual sign-up, it's like 40%. Are we seeing a real big response for virtual learning in the different school systems in the region?
It really depends on where they are. St. Tammany, last I heard, was relatively low. Jefferson is growing stronger, but then again, the COVID caseload in Jefferson has been much higher. So that might explain that difference. In some schools, there isn't even a choice. In most schools, there is, and it's small numbers in some, it's large numbers in others. There doesn't seem to be a huge amount of rhyme or reason, except for maybe the parish-by-parish comparisons where case numbers are high or case numbers are low, and that helps parents make a decision.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Don. We'll just see how everything moves along in the weeks ahead. Thank you. Jeff, another issue that is before us, and this is, impacted by COVID, it's voting by mail-in ballots and early voting. What are we seeing develop here in Louisiana?
Well, right now it looks like the state's headed toward an impasse over early voting. Secretary of State Kyle Ardoin presented his emergency plan for voting earlier this week, which would limit absentee ballot excuses to anything, to the categories that were allowed to get absentee ballots before the pandemic, plus people that had contracted COVID basically during early voting up until the election. The governor has said that this is an inadequate plan because it doesn't include provisions for people that are ordered to quarantine or people that have health concerns that would keep them from going to the polls in person. And basically, because the governor would have to approve the emergency plan, it looks like we're headed toward a rejection of what the Secretary of State is proposing, which could send the whole issue to the courts for them to decide.
When would this be decided? I mean, the November elections are just really right around the corner.
It would have to be relatively soon. Again, the plan was just presented this week, and so things would have to move pretty quickly. It's worth noting that the Secretary of State has said that he crafted his plan with an eye on what could pass the Republican legislature, since they would also have to sign off on this. So we've got some competing political things here that could play a role.
And the governor was really upfront with his objection when he said, "I oppose this thing," and he said it's going to have to be decided by court. It's not a maybe, but he says because what you said with the legislature, with the governor, that the courts can ultimately decide this.
Also, one thing in Artwin's plan was to make actual early voting, a few days longer. So, do you think that's going to be sticking around? Will we have more time to early vote?
That I'm not sure. There's a lot of objection to. The main focus right now of the main objections to Artwin's plan are really from people like the governor who say that absentee balloting should be expanded. Again, with the concerns that people who have health concerns, people who might be taking care of someone who is vulnerable, who'd be vulnerable themselves, that sort of thing, wouldn't be able to make it to the polls either during early voting or on election day, and should be able to get a ballot.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jeff. Going to go back over to Dawn right now. And there's a hotel in New Orleans East that has been an eyesore for a long time, but that's going to change?
That is going to change, or it's supposed to be changing. It's the hotel that used to be the Holiday Inn as you get over the high rise when you're leaving town or as you're getting close to the city. It's now known as the Caveman Hotel. We have some images just because of the graffiti that covers the entire 200-foot wide front of the structure. It really is almost like an entrance sign to the city of New Orleans. It has been vacant and a mess really since right after Hurricane Katrina. It has now been owned since 2017 by a small group of developers known as Gardner Development, LLC. I spoke this week with Peter Gardner, the president of the LLC, and he has big plans to redevelop this. He said, yes, I've owned it since 2017. I said, why did it? And he answered my question for me. Why did it take so long to make any changes? The biggest hurdle, he said, was acquiring historic tax credits. This building is on the National Register of Historic Places because it is a mid-century modern design, the original kind of Holiday Inn with cinder block design out in a flower pattern. So they were able to get historic tax credits for it. Then he said his next big hurdle really is perception in New Orleans East. Local bankers don't want to loan him money for the project. The project, however, does have some funding now and has gotten a conditional use permit from the city to allow residences above ground level on this kind of structure. It's going to be turned into from a 216-room hotel to a 144-unit, mostly one-bedroom apartments. It will have a pool, a fitness center, a dog walk. It will be rents around $750 a month, which I'm told is workforce-type housing, the people who work in our hospitality sector. It's close by. It's right over the high rise, right across the canal as you're heading out of the city. The part of the problem with redeveloping this type of property under the city's current master plan and comprehensive zoning is that it was built at a time when New Orleans was all about the car and getting out of the city, and there's not really room for bike lanes and sidewalks and treescapes and the kinds of things folks are asking for now. So he has had to get some variances on what he actually can do with the property. He's hoping that the city and the state will help and plant some trees and maybe give room for a bike lane. He has gotten some variances on things like the parking lot is supposed to have a green space every 10 spaces. So every 11th space is a green space. There's just not room for that, but he is going to have to put in the same amount of green space, just in one larger chunk instead of the smaller chunks throughout the parking area. All told, he's hoping to be finished with this project by the end of 2021, and really hoping that what it does is spurs further development along that Chef-Menteur highway in New Orleans East that has been just kind of dilapidated since Hurricane Katrina.
And it seems like this would sort of fit the need for affordable housing. We keep hearing so much of that need.
Right, 144 units at $750 a month.
All right,
that's
Don.
good.
Thanks a lot. All right, going around the table to all of you guys now. Other news that has been happening. Errol, start with you.
Well, last week we talked about the possibility of carnival parades being canceled, and it hasn't been resolved yet. But the question was raised, well, what if they cancel in New Orleans? Would some of the parades go to Jefferson Parish? Well, it turns out the answer is no. As reported by WWL Radio this week, Jefferson Parish President Cynthia Lee Shang said that if Orleans cancels its parades, Jefferson Parish will too. And the reason is because if Orleans cancels its parade, they don't want all the crowd coming from Orleans because that would cause the kind of hazards that we're trying to get away from.
Okay.
And so it's got to be one or the other.
Okay, thanks a lot. Will?
Norman C. Francis Parkway.
That's right.
As a kid, I grew up not far from Dr. Francis, and I am excited to hear that the New Orleans City Council unanimously approved this. It actually won't change until January, and that's primarily because census and other issues don't need to change addresses and cause any problems for people.
Such a wonderful gentleman he is. Thanks a lot, Will. Yeah. Jeff, to you real quick.
As was mentioned earlier, as two storms headed into the Gulf this weekend, so just keep aware and be prepared for whatever comes next week.
And let's pray they don't come our way. Okay, Jeff, thanks. Don, real quick to you.
And not just Jefferson Davis Parkway changing, but perhaps Lusher High School and John McDonough High School. The Orleans Parish School Board took the first step to make those changes as well.
Okie doke, other changes perhaps on the horizon. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining us. Y'all stay safe. Thank you all for joining us. You stay safe too, and we will see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.